being.
You know, they often say they come for the music and they knock over the box next to the thing. Thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We talked in our Let's Talk Science of Mind class this morning about the presence. And one of the things that really came through as the example is that music is the presence. And when I mean presence, it's the energy, it's the love, it's the joy, it's the peace that is the demonstration of spirit. So thank you for that. And thank you all for being here today. Whether you are with us in the room or joining us virtually, I apologize ahead of time for a day kind of personal indulgence. And I say that because this journey started 40 years ago on October 20th when I was ordained as a minister. And one of the things that I noticed over this 40-year trajectory, if there was one word that would be the word that describes it all, it's the word pivot. And so I want to talk to you a little bit today about the pivot. And it comes from a quote from Joseph Campbell. And it starts reminding me of a quote of Joseph Campbell when he said, "We must be willing to give up the life that we planned for the life that we were called to live." Now, that does not mean to not have a plan, but it does mean not to be attached to the plan. Does that make sense? And we have to look at what does it all mean. Now, some of you may be looking up at me today and going, is he really wearing jeans? And I know that if my dearly departed mother was watching from up there or anywhere, she would be going, oh my God, he's wearing jeans. I raised him better than that. But I did it today for a very intentional reason. Because one of the things that we do to people, and you may have heard a little part of this story before, but as I was preparing my talk and getting ready, the presence of my stepfather was speaking to me. And his name was Everett. And Everett was the son of a preacher. And one of the things that he was so proud of was the fact that his father was a revival minister. And his father would travel all throughout Ohio and Indiana and Illinois and Michigan and Kentucky being a revival minister that people could not wait to get into the tent to hear him speak. But Everett never got to hear his father speak. He knew of him. Other people would tell him about how great his dad was and how inspirational his father was, but he didn't get to experience him. Well, as it would work out, when he was about 7 years old, there was going to be a revival in the very town that Everett lived in. In fact, the tent was just a mile down the road from his farm. So that day when he got off of school, he was so excited that he was going to be able to hear his dad for the first time that night. And he rushed home from school, and he had chores he had to do because that was how things were done in the day. So he went through his chores. He got them done one by one because he wanted to run down the road to be with his dad. And the very last thing he decided to do was to go to the pump that was on the outside of the house and wash his face. So he pumped the water, and the water came out, and he rubbed it on his face, and as any boy at 7 years old would do, went like this with his hands. So he runs down to where the tent is, and he sneaks around the side of the tent, and he finds a place where the tent had come together, and he pulls it back, and he sees There's the front row. There's the stage. He sees his dad on the stage, and he spies an empty chair in the front row. So he pulls the thing apart, and he walks over, and he gets in that chair, and he sits down, and he looks up at his dad, just as his dad gets up to speak, and his dad walks up and says, "How dare you come into the house of the Lord looking like that? Filthy urchin. Get up and get out of here." And so he got up, and he made his way through the same split in the tent. And as he was walking around the tent to get back to the road to go home, they started to sing, "Just As I Am." And he thought, what? He didn't have the word for hypocrisy. But what hypocrisy. So from that day forward, Everett never went back to a church. He was done with God. He was done with organized religion. And then he met my mother. And she knew how to speak to his heart. See, he was an artist. He was a woodworker. He was a craftsman. He would be able to refinish any piece of antique furniture, and it would be looking brand new. In fact, he would have people waiting 3 years just to have him restore a piece of antique furniture that they had found. And so she came home from church one Sunday and said, "You know, Everett, that banister at the church, it's sticky. And I know it's walnut, but I don't know why it's sticky." And all right, I'll go take a look at it. Now, if you saw the movie with Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau, Grumpy Old Man, Everett looked like Walter Matthau and talked like him. But he goes up to the church on a Monday, touches the banister, and said, "Well, this just needs to be refinished." So he goes and he gets his sander and he gets his tools and he restores the banister to the original walnut look that it had. And then the minister sees this and he goes, "Oh, wow, that's an amazing job that you've done." And he said, "You know, the screen in front of the pipe organ is also walnut, but it's gotten really dark. Is it supposed to happen that way?" "Well, let's go take a look." "Why, no." So he was up refinishing the walnut screen. So within 6 months, there was not a piece of wood that had not been refinished by my stepfather in this church. And so the minister said, "Well, we really need to show our appreciation. Can you come on a Sunday so that we can thank you?" Well, that seemed to make sense for him because at the bottom of this, he was a businessman and he thought, okay, there's 200 or 300 people here, and if they know that I did this work, I might get some business out of this. So he went to church with my mom, and people came up and thanked him. And so what had typically been the pattern is we would be dropped off at church. He would go home and get the shower, put on this jacket and a tie and the dress slacks, and come and pick us up precisely when church was over, and we'd go out to dinner on Sunday. Now he just started to say, "I think I'll come along." Well, after a period of time, and because he liked the minister and because he liked the people, he decided he was going to join the church. And the minister talked with him and said, "Okay, if you really want to do this, we can do this." And Everett said, "I want to be baptized." And the minister said, "Okay, that's absolutely, on one condition, that I can wear my blue jeans." So on the day that he was baptized, he shows up in his work blue jeans, covered in sawdust, stains of varnishes and paints of projects past, and he was baptized. And so the only way today that I could make a tribute to him is to wear my blue jeans. And I think that that is the lesson of what we want to do with people in our lives, is we must meet them where they are. Nobody preached to him that he was not going to make it into heaven. What they did is they met him with, "It's so good to see you. I am so glad that you're here." And that is what makes the science of mind and this philosophy of the Centers for Spiritual Living such a unique one. Just like the opening song, this door is open. This door is open to whoever you are. When we were at CSL Fresno, there was a moniker on the front of the sign that said, "Many paths to one universal God." There are many paths to one universal God, but there's one universal God. We teach in this faith, this philosophy, this way of living, there is no place that God is not. And I don't want you to get it twisted. That's the name of my blog, by the way. Don't get it twisted. But don't get it twisted that when we say, if you need to insert the word spirit for God, you're empowered to do so, or that you can insert love instead of saying the word God, that you can do so. Yes, you're invited to do that, but don't get it twisted. God is still there. You're working out your definition of a power that's greater than yourself. You're not uplifting the idea that that presence does not exist. Am I clear on that? Because that's what we have to get really clear, that this presence that we experience, this presence of the music, when we're all right there aligned with it, this presence when we can walk out with nature and absolutely feel grounded and uplifted and at peace and with joy, that's God. Others has transformed the definition of God to be a punitive thing. Others have weaponized this idea of God to be something in order to control people. That's not God. You know, I worked with a woman this week that said, "I just want to know when God abandoned me." She did not like my answer when I said, "Well, whenever you turned away." Because God never turns away from us. We believe that there has been a pivot. We believe that it has happened. And so we look for examples of why that's true. We believe in our heart and soul that we do not deserve what it is that we are praying for or affirming. So why are we surprised when we don't get it? Because, see, God, as we teach God in this faith, this philosophy, is the yes. It is the affirmative action that will absolutely bring you what is for your highest and best. It's when we turn away and we start to doubt and we start to see examples of why it's not true, and we get to hone in on it. But then something happens. We meet some people. We meet some people that are kind to us, whose life seems to be working, and we get a little bit curious about what they're up to. And then we get in their presence, and suddenly our life starts to work again. Things start to happen again. Until we start to doubt that they're going to happen even more. Then we get a little shaky again, and then we start looking for evidence of why it's not working, because we want the thing that does work to be even more profound, just to make sure that we're still on track. Look at us humans being humans. We are just peopling all over the place. Because we are in this great classroom of understanding how life got to be the way that it is. Now, I talked a little bit earlier at the top of my talk about having a plan. One of the things that has been consistent in my ministry for 40 years is I always had a plan. And some folks might look at my plans and go, dang, not a one of them worked out. Not a one of them. But that's not true, and that's not my experience. My experience is all I had to do was pivot. All I had to do was let go of what my ego, my mind, my heart had planned and let God intervene. I started my ministry with Terry Whitaker Ministries in 1982. I took all the classes to be a practitioner. I took all the ministerial classes, and I was just one class short of becoming a minister. In fact, I was already planning the ordination ceremony because I knew I just needed one last class. Terry had named me the last practitioner with Terry Whitaker Ministries. And then she said, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm getting that it's not about a title. It's not about being a practitioner. It's not about being a minister. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to ordain anyone, or I'm not going to license anyone as a practitioner. My plan wasn't working out. Now, I could have walked away and been absolutely frustrated and angry that this was taken from me. Have you ever been there? Have you ever gotten to like 95% and it appeared that somebody had done something to you that caused you not to go all the way, and you're still telling that story today about how you almost did the thing? Instead, I decided to pivot. And I know it might have been a little anger right at that moment, but it's like I'm dialing people. This is when you had a touch-tone phone. Who is this Centers, they weren't called that then, United Centers of Spiritual Living? Who else is doing this besides her? And they go, oh, well, we can connect you with the San Francisco Institute of Religious Science and Reverend Dr. Daniel Pursuti. Dr. Pursuti, I just did this thing, and I got 95% of the way there, and I am not willing to stop. He said, I will ordain you. Because he knew Terry, he knew the classes that she had taught, and he knew that I had the work. And so I was ordained. And plan number 2, I was going to be there were 400 people in Terry Whitaker's classes at the Cathedral Hill Hotel in San Francisco. I just knew they'd all come over to the California Women's Club on K Street or on Sacramento Street, where I had decided to launch the Fellowship in Light Ministries, my first nonprofit. They came, and I got to learn the lesson of how to work with 400 pissed off people. Because they were mad that Terry quit. Now, I could have walked away and said, okay, that plan didn't work. And then this thing called the AIDS pandemic happened. And when this AIDS pandemic happened, suddenly there were people in that very congregation of 400 people that I had gotten close to and worked with that were starting to die of AIDS. And no minister would officiate their funeral. No funeral home would allow their body to come inside the funeral home. No church would do a memorial service for them. And I thought, I'm a minister. I can officiate. I can do this thing. That wasn't my plan. But I had to pivot. I had to let go of the plan that I had in order to do what it is that I was called to do. That's what we do. And after doing that, I made the connections with folks in this fight of being allies and advocates for folks exposed to HIV and AIDS, and what we did to serve that community. And we founded the Gennard AIDS Foundation in Walnut Creek. And what we did is we realized that there was a game being played with the Social Security Administration. There was a game being played with health insurance that would pay for this but not pay for that. And if they paid for this and didn't pay for that, then the chances of that person living was nil to none. And that was a subconscious thing, because there was a whole quadrille of people that believed, well, you brought this on yourself. You deserve to die anyway. So the Gennard AIDS Foundation came up with a way that we were going to pay for anything that nobody else would pay for. And we did it. And over 7 years, we raised over $1 million. And we did just that. We paid for stuff that nobody else would pay for. So, by the time that was over, and the 90s came along, I was burnt out. I was like, okay, I'm going to step away from this. I'm just going to be a participant. I'm just going to come in and sit in the back and enjoy the music. And then I met a woman by the name of Reverend Barbara Blaisdell at the First Christian Church in Concord, California, who came to call upon me after my mom had made her transition, just to make sure that I was okay. But gosh, she had a dynamic energy. She could inspire anyone to do anything. And of course, within 6 weeks, I was speaking from the pulpit at First Christian Church in Concord, California. And then a few months later, her husband came to me. He was the president of the region. And he said, "You live in Tracy, right?" "Yeah, I live in Tracy, California." "Well, we used to have a congregation in Tracy, and we don't know what happened. So we'll give you $25,000 to go start a church in Tracy, California. Are you up for it?" Absolutely. So I went. I got a 501c3. I got the nonprofit status from the IRS, and I founded Gateway Christian Church. Now, what I didn't know is that I didn't need that 501c3, but that would come in handy later. But I did the work. I had a plan. I was activating the plan. The only thing the regional president said is that within 3 years, you must have 75 members. Within 3 years, we had 72 members. Sorry, you're going to have to merge with Livermore. You can't sustain a community with less than 75 members. Thank you for doing this. Now, to some folks, that looked like failure. My plan did not work out. But then, that weekend, my beloved friend, the Reverend Dr. Andriette Earl, came out to my house for the weekend and said, "Something has been stirring on my heart. I have been called to start a new church. And I just wanted to know, would you work with me on it? Would you help me out if I need counsel?" And I said, "I'm going with you. And I happen to have a 501c3. Do you need it?" And we launched Heart and Soul Center of Light with the 501c3 that was intended for Gateway Christian Church that wasn't needed. We pivoted. We let go of our plan for the plan that God wanted us to realize. And so, Saturday, November 2nd, Heart and Soul will celebrate its 16th anniversary. Now, you would think I'd be done there. But there was a time a few years ago, I'm going to say around 2012, 2013, where one other center in Oakland decided that they were losing their charismatic minister who was going to retire, and there was a possibility of us coming together and them becoming a part of Heart and Soul. And so we went to this weekend retreat with our plan. Our board of trustees walked into that meeting with a plan of how it could work, and everybody would be empowered, and they would all happen. And they were like, not with that woman over us. And then I thought, okay, what you all really need is an interim minister here then, because no one is going to be successful being the person who followed the person. Because the person they were following had been their senior minister for 25 years. And she was very charismatic, and they just, they were still in their grief about that. So it wasn't going to happen. But the facilitator from the home office of Centers for Spiritual Living came up to me and said, "Oh, you know this thing about interim ministry?" And I go, "Yes." And he goes, "Which speaks to you more, Santa Cruz or Fresno?" Now, I don't know why I said Fresno. But I said Fresno. And he said it used to be a thriving, large congregation. And we need to know what happened. So why don't you go there? And I went there. And it was the doctoral program of life. But it was a lesson in it's time to put a bow on it and call it good and done. But you see, there is a gift in that. And 3 of them are in this room. Betty and Sue and Jamie have been my spiritual traveling companions for the last 9 years. And it was because I was willing to pivot. And out of that, I got the idea of creating the Elder Pride focused ministry. And Elder Pride focuses on elders in the LGBTQ plus community to help them age forward with grace and ease. It's a part of CSL, but it's a focused part of CSL. And so we launched in 2020, and we had 75 people for our opening conference. And I had a plan that we would have a conference and gathering if not every year, every 2 years. And we were off and running, and it was great. And then the pandemic hit. Now, in our little business plan, there was this idea to go virtual down the road. We went virtual the next day. We had to pivot. And what I want you to know, those 3 women were a part of a group that met every day at 4 o'clock with other members of that community so that no one felt isolated, neglected, marginalized, or forgotten about when the world was shutting down. Now, they could have called it quits after a year because, after all, the pandemic was over with, but no, they continued on for over 4 years, a meeting every day at 4 o'clock. Just to check in with one another. That was not a part of the original plan. But we pivoted because that's what Spirit was leading us to do. Now, there happened to be this audacious woman that was a part of the Elder Pride Focus Ministry who said, "Can I talk to you about our community in Visalia?" Where? South of Fresno? Even hotter? Okay. And so for the last year and a half, we have been playing together because we were willing to pivot and understand God ain't done with us yet. And we have stuff to do. So here's what I know. In life, we must be willing to pivot. I get that Everett was willing to pivot when he went to church and had the fortitude to say to that minister, I'll be baptized if I can wear my blue jeans. He was willing to pivot. We are willing to pivot. We are willing to pivot. For the most part. Now, you're going to laugh when I'm about to say what I'm about to say. Get ready to giggle. And if you don't giggle, tickle the person next to you so they will giggle. Because this is some funny stuff. I was talking to my financial planner who does my taxes. Now, he laughs a lot. But one of the things that he said to me is, when are you going to retire? And I said, listen, come December of 2026, I'm done. I'm going to retire because I want to write. I want to do the next thing. That's the plan. This is when you now giggle. But you got to have a plan. Now, I know I want to spend my last year in ministry with y'all, if you're willing to have me. But that's your decision. But here's what I want you to know. Sometimes it's not popular being the minister. Sometimes the minister, I learned this in my secular career of human resources, and I was either the director or vice president of human resources. No matter how large the company is, you can't be friends with nobody because you may have to fire them, or you may have to counsel them, or you may have to be the one to give them the hard news. Being the minister is kind of the same way. One of the things with a minister as that calling is, I have to stand up here and tell you the truth about how the world works. And I have to be the reminder of, no, we are affiliated with the Centers for Spiritual Living. And we have to lift up those what we believe statements. And if you can't believe them, you can't be in leadership here. That's just, it just is. Now, I know we love people and we want people around, but it's like, we have a covenant with the Centers for Spiritual Living that we believe in a power greater than ourselves. And we believe that there are 13 principles that guide how the universe works, and we are working our best to see them in action and to understand them. That's what we're called to do. Now, if we're not willing to do that, we need to go do something else. We need to go pivot and do a different thing. Coexist. We're coexisting with the Centers for Spiritual Living because we say that's a philosophy, that's a faith, that's a way of living that we can get behind. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't other things out there in the world that other people can do, because, as I said earlier on, there are many paths to one universal God. But for me and in my house, this is what we do here. And this is where we learn here. And there's this presence that shows up when it feels right. And what I know, it's when I'm in that Let's Talk Science and Mind class at 9:30 on Sunday mornings. That feels like the same energy that these three women created every day at 4 o'clock in the wellness program check-in at Elder Pride. That's when it's like, oh yes, there's a sweet, sweet spirit in this place. When I hear this music, yes. No place on earth I'd rather be than whenever Kevin or Chase or whoever is leading the music is doing it, and it feels so right. And when I have to join you virtually, the person that I have the most eye contact with and energy with is James. And when I hear James say the prosperity prayer, or when I hear him lift up that mission statement, And he didn't have to because he could be busy doing stuff. It's like, that's the sweet, sweet spirit in this place. And Elias and Simon bringing that youthful energy, I can't think of someplace else I'd rather be than right here, right now. So here's how I want to end. Today we are going to gather at 11:45 for our town hall meeting. We're going to have a little potluck. We're going to celebrate my 40th year. But I want to really hear from each and every one of you, what is your highest hope for CSL Visalia in 2026? What is your highest hope? We gotta have a plan. If we have a plan and we need to pivot, we know we can pivot. But if we do not have a plan and life happens, then it just looks like chaos. Does that make sense? So I hope and I pray and I affirm and I lift up that you'll come and want to play and be a part of that conversation. Just to say, here's my highest hope. And here's what it would feel like if that happened. Here's what I would notice. Here's what I would sense. Here's what I would feel. And describe that. And I'll even give you the trick question that's going to come up in that. Then it's like, what are you willing to do to make it happen? But don't get scared about that. We're in this together. So I'm hoping that I have inspired you today to say yes to life. To say yes to knowing that even amongst the chaos that's out there in the world, we're going to catch some folks doing something right and doing something good. Yesterday, over 7 million people protested, and there wasn't so much as an arrest. That's who I want to lift up. That's who I want to say, good work. Look, it's working. We've got to look to those examples of why it's working. Then the other stuff, we can manage. But above all else, for a time like this, people in your world and in your life are looking to you to see how you are coping with a time like this. I want them to be looking at you and seeing the biggest smile on your face and going, I want some of what she's got. Whatever he's eating, I want some of that. That we become the inspiration for one another in a time like this. That we come together to put our hands at one another's back to say, how can I be an ally? How can I be an advocate? How can I support you through a time like this? Have a plan. Have your plan. And finally, know that if you want to know what your plan is, what God has in store for you, what God wants you to be doing, all you have to do is look at your gifts. That's what God wants Chase to do and Kevin to do and the musicians to do. You have a talent. You have a gift just waiting for you to stand up and say yes to. Does that make sense? You have within you your own personal hallelujah chorus singing. And I want you to hear them anytime you have doubt. So with that, I say thank you, thank you, thank you. And so it is.